Welcome to Leading Together podcast. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Joe Olwig. And this week, we're honored to have Sam Spurlin with us. He spent more than a decade at the Ready, where he helped large, complex organizations rethink how they work. He led enterprise transformation initiatives for Fortune 500 and highly regulated organizations such as Pacific Gas and Electric and General Electric, partnering directly with executive leaders to redesign operating models and enable faster, higher quality decision-making across their organizations. And personally, we're huge fans of the work you've done over the years, Sam. We've gotten to know you a little bit over the last couple of years. And I think I can speak for both of us in saying we've just been really grateful for your thought leadership and listened to a number of your podcast episodes on the Ready's Pod. So just a real honor to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, of course. I'm very happy to be here. Very happy to be on the other side of the podcast mic and just get to show up and talk about stuff.
Yeah, we'll love to hear at the end if this feels more like an easy thing to do versus the other dynamic you're used to. Well, maybe just to kick us off here, what's bringing you some joy these days? Maybe it's a book, a new habit, new friend.
Yeah, it's a great question. So a couple things come to mind for me. One, I started my own thing called Deliberate Works, and new things like that have a way of kind of becoming all encompassing and are just really exciting. Starting new things, it's still the early days where everything is new and fresh, and the whole world is in front of me. So that has been a lot of fun over the last couple of weeks. And the other thing that comes to mind is that for a while, I was doing a lot of long distance triathlon training. And I enjoyed it, did that for a couple of years, but in the last 9 months or so, I decided to back off of that and have been kind of getting connected with other things that I have liked to do for fitness, like lifting weights and playing hockey again and things like that. So it's been fun to kind of figure out what my relationship to fitness is when I don't have like a looming scary race on the calendar.
Yeah. Ice hockey?
Yep.
Wow. That's great. Joe, did you ever play ice hockey like just as a kid?
I've only played roller, and I was going to ask Sam, I mean, this is something you played growing up, I assume?
Oh yeah, for sure. So I grew up in Southeast Michigan. Hockey happening everywhere, and it was a huge part of my life for a long time. And then took a bit of a break as an adult due to some concussion problems. That's actually why I got into triathlon. It was like, all right, I need to do something that has a lower chance of concussions, but have picked it back up again recently.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
You just go old guy mode. I know old guy mode in basketball. I don't know what it looks like in hockey, but
similar. It's similar.
Not very quick and very low concussion risk the way I play basketball now. So
yeah, totally. In hockey, it's called beer league, and it's generally as you get older, it gets slower and hopefully safer as we get frailer.
Right.
Well, my recent connection to adult hockey was one of my son's friends' dads. Was letting me know that like 5 years ago, he did like a learn to play hockey as an adult.
That's cool.
And there was like a program for it, and he plays every Friday now. And I thought,
that's so cool.
I love hockey. Never played ice hockey. Thought that was pretty cool. It's now his favorite part of his week, and you can learn how to play ice hockey even as a 40-year-old,
even as an adult.
Really, really cool. Yeah.
That's great. Well, Sam, one of the things we're excited to talk to you about is this concept of helping teams to create agreements. And we're excited to talk to you about it because, one, we've listened to a number of things you've shared over the years with it. It's a concept that we introduced to a number of our clients as well. But we haven't really talked about it on the podcast. In fact, I don't know if we've even really talked about it much on our newsletter. So would love for you to just maybe help our listeners understand like the general concept of agreements and also like what's the problem or issue that they're aiming to solve for teams?
Sure. When I think of team agreements, they're really just commitments that members of a team are making to each other in terms of a handful of different things. Broadly, how are we going to work together? So sometimes they take the form of just really tactical stuff, like what's our operating rhythm? What are the meetings we're going to have on what cadence for what purposes? Like, let's talk about those and actually write those down. What tools are we going to use and what expectations do we have for each other in terms of how we use those tools? Often communication tools, are we using Slack? Are we using Teams? What does it mean to tag somebody? What are the expectations for kind of getting back to each other on those sorts of things? And I think they can sometimes also take the form of these kind of like higher level sort of vibe or mindset type things as well too, like how we want to try to be with each other. Are there some principles that are important to us that we want to try to embody as we work together as teammates? And I've just found, a lot of value around having those conversations. Definitely at the front end of a team starting to come together, but as an ongoing conversation that we check in on. It's just, it's a really valuable thing, I think, for being on a team and improving the way we work together over time.
Yeah. I'm hearing what you're saying here, Sam, is like there's an unsaid part of what you're saying here is that there's something really meaningful about making this explicit, because for a lot of the things you just described, maybe not the kind of deep principle, more vibe oriented ones, but for the other ones, some teams might feel like, well, we already kind of have some of these norms established. So what's the value in making them more explicit?
Yeah. Well, the word you just used there was kind of, which
Right,
I
right.
hear as like, okay, yeah, you probably do kind of have these already
Yeah.
articulated. So I just think there's a lot of value to seeing them written down, and we can really decide if we have these shared values or not, or shared ways of working or not. A lot of times we have like 80% of a shared sense of how we actually want to do things. And once you actually have it written down, we can make decisions about it and tweak things. And if we're just kind of operating with what we each assume each other has in our brains, we just set the table for misunderstandings or just like talking past each other. So yeah, sometimes these like initial conversations, depending on the type of organization that you're in, are kind of just codifying things that we truly all agree to and already know. Great. Doesn't take very long and we can write it down. But almost every other time, or almost every time I've facilitated something like this, we realized that there was like 75% that was completely understood and 25% that we all had slightly different expectations around. And that conversation around that 25% can make a huge difference.
Yeah. Sam, when I first sort of heard the language, team agreements, what resonated so much about it was the idea that this isn't sort of just this top-down expectation that sort of team leader or manager is just putting down on paper and saying, "Hey, here are the expectations, here's the norms." That it was this agreement that the team, was collectively agreeing to, committing to, and as a result, had some voice and agency in what that agreement was. Uh, a huge part of our work is about helping teams to see just how valuable it is to the team when others are involved in shaping how work works. And so I'd be interested to hear what you've seen um, in terms of effective process for creating agreements, right? So if you were to get into the weeds of like these moments where teams are actually creating an agreement, be it because we're just trying to make something explicit, or maybe because there's some tension, some inefficiency, and they're sort of noticing it and want to move from that to an agreement. What have you seen in terms of just sort of process and best practice there?
Yeah, a couple of things come to mind. With that. So one thing that I've definitely learned about this work is early when I first started doing it, I assumed, because I think it's pretty logical to think like, okay, this team is coming together before we do anything. Let's set some agreements because then we have them and then we can use them. And I've actually found it is better to wait on that a little bit. Just be a team and try to get your stuff done for a couple of weeks. And you and take note of where some agreements would be helpful. And then when we come together for that first retro or a couple of weeks after we've kind of formed and gotten into the work, we can make agreements that are hyper specific and hyper relevant to the actual work that we're doing. What I
Yeah.
learned before is that when you do it at the front end, before a team has done any sort of work together yet, it can feel really theoretical because we don't
Yeah.
know what the work is really going to be yet. So we
Yeah.
can make agreements about anything. And then we realize we spent, 90 minutes talking about a bunch of agreements that aren't even that relevant. So I think it's
Yeah.
actually better for it to hurt a little bit before we actually start doing agreements.
Like
And then
that.
the other thing that I've also kind of evolved my thinking on is early days, I would really try to facilitate something from scratch with the team. So like basically rolling up with nothing, be like, okay, let's figure out what our agreement should be.
Totally.
And I have in the last few years kind of shifted from somebody bring a proposal for some of
Yeah.
these things. So like I often, as kind of an outside facilitator or coach, will bring an initial proposal of things that I think might work or I've seen work in other places. And we can certainly change them and throw them away or do whatever we want with them. But it's more productive than just kind of trying to do it from scratch, I think.
Yeah. That second piece really resonates. I think we've seen firsthand how that can just provide the clarity for a team about what this can look like.
Yeah,
Sometimes an initial teaching on agreements can, it can almost feel like, what am I missing here? Because it's it's not all that complex, right?
yeah,
It is an expectation, a commitment that we're all agreeing to, and so sometimes just showing them sort of a model based on maybe what the conversation was can be really
yeah,
helpful for them to see. Oh, that's all this is, right?
totally.
Yeah,
Well, and people often don't have much experience with other ways of doing things. They don't even realize necessarily what the kind of landscape of options even are for
yeah,
agreements around communication or meeting.
right,
Like what even is an operating rhythm? So
right.
I've found it to be really valuable to just bring examples of those things into the conversation. So I'm not asking people to come up with things just out of whole cloth with things they've never actually experienced before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sam, are there like terms or language that people carry commonly that their mind goes to like, oh, this is like that, right? You're offering a
Yeah.
better version of this thing that maybe I have an idea of that hasn't been working as effectively. For example, this I may be offering a totally wrong example here, but I think some of the things that we hear at times is like, oh, that let's update an SOP about that, or
Sure.
maybe there's some core essence of our P&P manual. But I think if people are being honest, they're saying, well, those things don't really change team behavior. So
Mhm. Yeah.
do you how do you help teams like reframe this to say this is a better version of maybe something you're familiar with that hasn't been
Yeah.
working the way you wanted it to work?
Yeah, the two examples I think SOP is a good one. The other two that I was thinking that you might say are RACEs or
Mm.
like SLA, like service level agreements.
Uh-huh.
Um, I think tools like that often shade too far into a complicated view of the world. And what I mean by that
Mm.
is in contrast with a complex view of the world. So there's lots of folks who talk about kind of the difference between complexity and complicated. I was first exposed to it through Aaron
Mm.
Dignan's work, the founder of The Ready, and he wrote a great book called Brave New Work. But if you haven't really thought about or aren't aware of the difference between complicated and complex, the easiest way to think about it is like a complex system is something like the weather or traffic or growing a garden or raising a child. Like these are systems that are kind of inherently unknowable, or at least not knowable at the same level as something that is far more mechanical or complicated, like a watch or an engine, where maybe incredibly intricate, may have hundreds or thousands of pieces to it. But if you have deep expertise and training in that sort of system, I can bring you a broken version. You can tell me how it's broken, and then you can fix it if you have the right tools and resources. And a lot of the things that we bring to our organizations seem to be based in a world where we think our organization is more like an engine or a watch
Mm.
than the weather or
Mm.
growing a garden. And I think things like SOPs and the braces and quite often kind of assume this more static, more complicated world than we actually are engaging with. So I think agreements, in some ways, they can feel a little bit more nebulous or more flexible because I think they are actually trying to better reflect the fact that we're dealing with a complex system, and
Yeah.
people can choose to not keep agreements, and agreements can be kind of broad. We can make them very specific. They're just, I think, a more flexible tool.
That's
I
really
love that.
helpful. Yeah, I mean, and big fans of Aaron's work and the podcast. And learned a lot from y'all, and big fans of agreements. I love the reminder on
Yep.
complexity versus complicated. The where immediately where my mind goes is, how do we keep track and monitor all of this, right? So, for a lot of our audience who is implementing agreements and using them, and big believers as well, I think you run into what are some of the guiding principles we need to really hold true in terms of monitoring and keeping track, and then more tactically, what what tool hacks might
Yeah.
you offer us as we
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
about this and
Well,
continue to
I'm
navigate it?
I'm
Yeah,
smiling because, the Ready a couple of years ago spun out a software company called Murmur to do
yeah,
this,
yep, oh yeah,
which was all about how do teams make and keep agreements and share them with each other, and what are the decision-making approaches that we can use to make these agreements. And Murmur was great, and unfortunately no longer exists.
oh
Mm.
To
no,
to that point, because I mean, we don't, not to do a retrospective or postmortem on why Murmur failed, but the way I have kind of come to think about this is that wherever you are keeping these agreements, usually for me, it's in some sort of team charter. Uh,
yeah,
they will they will live and die based on how often we go back to that document.
yeah,
So I am always using team charters or agreements as anchors for retrospectives.
mhm,
So every team that I coach, every team that I work with, part of their default operating rhythm is, every month, every 6 weeks or so, doing a retrospective where we are just looking at how did the last period of time go, what has been working well, what has not been working well. And that is also when I'll pop our charter or our agreements back up onto the screen, and we can self assess like, okay, we said these agreements matter to us. How are we doing keeping them? Great.
uh-huh,
Let's get a sense of that. And then, second question, are they helping us? Are these still
uh-huh,
the right agreements? Do we want to change them? Do we want to get rid of them? Do we want to add something new? And then if you're doing that on that sort of cadence, I think it's hard for it to go completely stale. It's when
mhm,
you do it once in some sort of kickoff event and then it gets filed away somewhere. And, there are new people joining the team, people are leaving the team, and there's just that old artifact of that one time we made some agreements.
Mhm.
That is a recipe for nobody knowing what the agreements are or not taking them seriously.
yeah,
That sounds familiar. Um,
right,
yeah.
right,
Well, Sam, you mentioned team charter. I'm curious, what do you see as when you think of a team charter? I think that what that brings to mind, for me at least, is that that feels more foundational, maybe more essential, more like starting place for teams. You might be thinking about it even more than that, but if you were to, when you're getting a team together, you mentioned some of these initially as you were just kind of beginning to talk about agreements, but what are like the handful of categories where you would almost say like every team should have an agreement related to these five things or these two things? So, yeah, just does some
Sure.
do you think of it that way? Or I'm curious, like what categories come to mind for you?
Yeah, I mean, I usually think of agreements as a part of a charter. So
Okay.
broadly, kind of the minimum viable charter in my mind is something like, a purpose or mission for the team. Like, why are we here? Can we answer that simply for ourselves and for other people who are kind of wondering or we have to work with? I
uh-huh,
think there's a lot of important work to be done around really answering that question. And if you can't answer that question, that leads to other conversations about like why does this team actually exist. But
uh-huh,
so
Yeah.
that's like one part. The second part is responsibilities. So basically, what are we responsible for in an ongoing way?
mm,
And making that list forces you to ask some questions like not only just what are we responsible for, but what are other people thinking that we are responsible for? And do we agree with those and are kind of putting them on our list, or are we disagreeing and we need to go have some conversations with other teams to make sure we are clear about what we are actually responsible for? It forces you to get clearer too about who are the actual customers of this team. Do they agree with our list of what we are responsible for? So there's some legwork to do around there to actually make sure that list reflects reality, and it should and almost always shows some gaps in various understandings of why or what this team is going to be doing. And then roles. So like who are the people on this team, which seems like such a simple question, but
Right.
there's always ambiguity in that. Is the team lead, the leader who's in charge of this team, are they on the team in the sense that they're in our like weekly meetings and doing the work, or
Mm.
are they just kind of checking in monthly? And I think getting clear on those sorts of things up front as much as you can, and then adjusting as we go, is kind of table stakes for a team. And then usually then after that, I have the list of agreements, and generally where I'm looking for an initial take is what's our operating rhythm. So what are the meetings we're going to have and on what cadence? And that's where
Yeah.
I'll often bring kind of a default suggestion. We're going to do a weekly action meeting. We're going to do every 6-week retrospective. Every quarter, we're going to do a strategy meeting. We can always adjust from there, but that's kind of the basics. And then getting some clarity around tooling and communication. Like, are we emailing each other? Are we all expected to be in Teams? Are we all expected to be in Slack? Like, let's get on the same page about that so that we're not all checking 4 or 5 different communication spots, which is kind of the default in a lot of organizations.
That's great. Sam, when you think about the teams that you've worked with who have really, knocked the team chartering process out of the park, they've invested in it up front and also continuously came back to it. Um, I assume, at a retrospective and they're nurturing it. What's true for these teams? If you were to sort of speak to some of the outcomes that you've seen, firsthand, what do you see when teams really do this well in terms of outcomes?
Yeah, I think when I see it go really well, the team treats the charter not as an artifact just for themselves, but for their key collaborators across the organization. So
Mm,
it's
yeah.
not enough to just like finish the charter and everybody on the team feels good about it. It's take
Right.
your charter out for a walk to other people who need to weigh in on it and actually
Yeah.
getting feedback and making adjustments. And I think that often sets them up to do much better work in the future, assuming that they're not a completely kind of independent team, which almost no team in any organization is. Like, there are other teams that you have to work with. So I think there's that aspect to it. I think another one is that they take it seriously, but also like can have fun with it.
Yeah.
I mean, the best
Mm,
teams that I have worked with, they don't dread coming together, which
mm,
sounds like funny to say, like, yeah, obviously, but I have observed enough teams where I know each individual person and I know you're like a fun loving, smart, kind of like open person. And then you show up to your team meeting and for whatever reason, like everybody clams up. The vibe is
mm.
super off.
Yeah.
So there's something about being able to create that environment where you are just in a more open posture, that I think is really, really, I think a charter can kind of like help you start moving in that direction. And then the last point is that they are very open to the idea that even though we did this hard work of writing things down into a charter, writing down agreements, they also agree that everything is an experiment. So this is
Mm,
our best take on these things right now. And we
right.
have the ability to change these things if they're not serving us.
Yeah.
And we are okay with maybe leaning into an agreement that is uncomfortable because we know we're not going to do it forever necessarily. Like, we're really experimenting with whether or not it's going to be useful. So those are the types of things that come to mind when I think of the best teams that I've worked with.
That's great. Love that.
Oh, that's great, Sam. I love the fun piece that you're calling out here. I think we have similar observations on, and I would also add, just as a consultant and guide, those are the teams that are also the most fun to work with. So,
Totally.
so it's great all around, great for them, great experience for us.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's something that I also appreciate you calling out, that there can be a connection to team charter, and even, what kind of team do we want to be when
Yeah.
we show up and collaborate and work with each other. And it's an important part that I think we sometimes can miss. So
Totally. Well, and I
yeah.
think early on too, maybe I was overly serious in some ways, and I wouldn't really like bring that up. But more recently, I've been asking teams like, "How do you want to feel when you all are working together?" Like, we
Mhm.
are all, often I'm working with very large organizations, so saying something like, "I know that you all are in this, huge organization that has lots of pressure and various things that you have to do that maybe you don't want to do, but when you're coming together with this team in particular, is there anything we want to try to like push against in terms of how like the culture overall is? Like, do we want to choose to try to be a different or better way when we are together?
Yeah.
Because teams don't have complete control over everything, but I think there are some things around, whether you call it the vibe or the culture of a team, that we can consciously try to cultivate.
Mm.
Sam, have you seen a connection between part of, well, I'm using the word connection, but I was about to ask you about connection. Part of what I'm hearing you say is like the degree to which teams are feeling connected to each other. And I'm wondering if you've seen a correlation to the size of a team and the
Yeah.
degree to which they truly get to know each other and feel more connected with one another.
Yeah, absolutely. The bigger it is, the harder it
Yeah.
is. I think, for lots of different reasons, when it's a big team, each person represents a smaller percentage of how things are going in that team. And I think it's easier to check out or think that something doesn't really matter when you're on a smaller team and you are just naturally a larger percentage of, you know, doing the work and taking up time and just like your energy being a larger percentage of the team's energy. I just think people tend to be on better behavior, and it's just
Mhm.
easier to coordinate with smaller teams.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, most organizations have this really unhelpful pattern of we don't really know who should be on this team. We don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. It's easier to just add one more person, just add one more person. And then before you know it, you've got teams of 15, 25, 35. And at that point, like what are we even doing? And so
Yeah.
I always say like 7 plus or minus 2. I think that's kind of a cliche. But I have liked that number, and more on the like 5 to 7 is like a real sweet spot.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead, Joe.
Well, I was just gonna say, you know, what you shared there about being deliberate about how do we want this to feel being on this team is I think a real unlock. You know, a lot of the leadership teams that we work with don't have all that well-defined sort of team identity, right? They were lacking something like a charter. And oftentimes that starts with things like purpose and roles and some of these foundational agreements. But the number of times we've seen firsthand just what you described, where they're arriving at that 4-hour quarterly sync, right? Or, an initial, big team development building day and sort of almost dreading it and even
Yeah.
maybe naming afterwards, like, "I was really dreading this," um, only to oftentimes enjoy more of it than they thought. But this idea of just being deliberate about how do we want it to feel to be on this team is really empowering, and
Yeah.
let's call our shot here, people. Like, what do we want the energy to be here? What do we want the vibe to be? And we talked so much about committing to teamship, taking shared ownership of the conditions of this team. But I don't know that, we've asked firsthand that question around, vibe and energy and feel. And that's really good.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. And I think there's always nuance there because the other thing that I wouldn't want to create is this artificiality of like, oh, we have to put on like a smiley face because we've decided that we're going to be that type of team.
Yeah.
There is an element of like acting your way into feeling a certain way. So like I'm not
Yeah.
actually 100% against something like that, but I think just stating like it's like we have a general intention of wanting this to be a good time to like to enjoy the time that we spend together. Because
That's right.
honestly, I think I think that is very connected to the team's ability to have difficult conversations. Like if I can laugh with the two of you and we're on a team together, and generally like we understand where each other are coming from, and a lot of our interactions are quite positive. If
Yeah.
becomes a moment where I feel like I really need to stand my ground on something or push back on something, I'm much more likely to be able to feel like I can do that and not damage our relationship. But
Yeah.
if our relationship is already fraught or non-existent, and then I need to like break it even further to represent something in my role, I just think it's harder to do. I mean, I'm basically talking
Yeah.
about psychological safety.
Yeah.
Um, but I think it's more than just that too.
Yeah. Well, it brings a different dimension into the sort of defining the team, right? When you ask the feel, like what you want it to feel, because oftentimes it's more about, maybe what are our values, what are some guiding principles, and you know, rarely have I heard we want to create a culture where you can, laugh and
Right.
sometimes, right?
Yeah.
But I think if we brought that additional layer and dimension to it, we would hear things like that. Some things that are just a bit more human, and ultimately are key ingredients to being a high performing team, right? If we
Yeah.
know TPS is one of the biggest indicators of an effective team, and we know that when we can actually laugh together or have good emotions when we come together, it can be another pathway to strengthening some of those core things. So
Totally. I've literally kind of tongue in cheek, but also like earnestly counted the number of times there were like smiles or laughter in a meeting, and like tracked that
man,
for a team over time
yeah,
to show them that, when there is this ability to kind of show up a little bit lighter,
Yeah.
things feel better, we get through things, we're more productive, we have better disagreements.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think there's something there, even though it's, I don't know, like I'm like the least woo-woo person you could possibly imagine in this
yeah,
work. And also like I stand by everything I just said for the like last
Yeah.
10 minutes.
That's great.
that's
Well,
good.
Sam, I don't know if you use this language in your work, but one of the things we talk a lot about with the teams we work with is just an appreciation for the underlying like foundational human needs that we all have,
Yeah,
and how those can be supported and kind of brought to life through the systems that we decide to collaboratively put in place. And one of, I think, our observations has been while we all have like essentially the same set of fundamental needs, we're all indexed differently. Right, like
sure.
you just said it about like you woo woo and right, it's important, but you recognize your own need for it may not be as high as one of your teammates. I don't know if that's an actual fundamental human need, but I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
But things like connection and clarity or autonomy, like as someone who's been an entrepreneur for a decade, like autonomy is really important to me. But I've worked with
Yeah.
people where connection is more important to them. And I guess what I'm saying here is it feels like it's important for teams to understand each other's differences so they can make a movement towards one another.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
curious the degree to which you see that in teams.
So I absolutely see that. And it makes me think of, something like a user manual to me,
Mhm.
which is, a document where we all just take some time to write down things like, here's how I like to receive feedback, or here's things that really bother me more than probably most people. And
Yeah.
answers to that, and like sharing those with each other, I think it can be a really valuable use of time. And I've worked with teams where, all of those user manuals to me are saved in a central location, and people actually go and refer to them when
Mm,
they're like, all right, I know like I got to have a tough conversation with Sean. Like, let me go just check
Mhm.
out his user manual, and just so I can get a
Yeah.
sense of like how this might go, or how might be able to make it go better. I think that's a huge thing. And then the other thing that just came to mind for me is I've seen where teams make an effort to get to know each other outside of like the one like tense meeting that they have a week.
yeah.
Often, maybe this is more open to like senior leadership teams, and it was definitely more so if you're kind of centrally located or not distributed. Um, but like having a meal with your team, like again, one of
Yeah.
these like really simple things that feels so cliche, and I'm cringing as I say it, but also you get to know somebody differently when you are not at work, you're having a meal together and you're just having a conversation with
Yeah.
no real agenda. Because the next time we're having a tough conversation in a work context, I can remember your humanity, which sounds horrible to say that you have to have that reminder, but I think we do actually need those reminders from time to time. And maybe even more so if we normally work in a distributed way. Like when I was at the Ready, I used to always joke that, the Ready, incredibly progressive organization. We all like each other a lot. We work in a distributed way, and 3 times a year, then 2 times a year, we would come together for full company retreats. And
Yeah.
those were the moments where I would get to remember that my colleagues were not just Slack messages and avatars on my screen that occasionally pissed me off.
Yeah.
They were actual people who I like a lot, and we
Yeah.
would leave
Yeah.
that retreat, and like we'd be refilled in our ability to fight constructively for the next 3 months. And by the end of it, we probably would be feeling like, okay, we need to like come back together in person and refill those cups. But there's something to that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we fundamentally believe that having connection amongst the team is critical to being a high performing team. And I think what you help us all to see is that we don't really need to overthink what it takes to strengthen connection. It can be as simple as quality time with those people over a meal. We started this conversation today with a little check-in. I guess we didn't all participate in it, but you did.
Yeah, I almost pushed
Right?
back and like I'm curious about your answers,
Yeah.
but it's
Yeah.
your show, so
Yeah, right. We should have done that. So, when you start to think about things like, okay, a meaningful check-in at the start of a meeting, some
Yeah.
quality time with your teammates, a user manual where you actually deliberately get to know each other. Those 3 things alone, when the people who are a part of it, like show up in authentic and invested ways, can make such a big impact, right? And so I think sometimes we can overthink like what it takes to strengthen connection amongst the team, and a commitment to some simple practices can go a really long way. So I think you
totally.
you help us to see that.
Yeah, a good check-in round takes 90 seconds.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you meet weekly and you do a 90-second check-in round for a year, that's a significant amount of time where you've learned something about your colleagues. And a lot of, I get pushback all the time from teams, especially senior leadership teams, like, we just
Yeah.
got to jump right into the meeting. Like, just you got to trust me. If you do, like, don't let your check-in take 10 minutes. Like, that's when it
Yeah.
really starts to feel bad. Like,
Yeah.
one sentence answers, question ready to go, not a weird and like uncomfortable question, something light and easy, but gives you a little glimpse into somebody's, like, there's an art to the check-in question to not make it
Yeah.
terrible.
Yeah.
I wanted to add just one kind of like extreme, like a counterpoint to this, not a counterpoint, but coming at it from the other direction that I think is also useful,
Yeah.
is that I think teams are better when people are not overly invested in the team. Like when you have other things going on at work
Mhm.
and in your life, and like
Mm.
your ego is not 100% wrapped up in how things are going on this team, I think it actually just lowers the temperature in a way that is much more useful. So I'm just kind of
Yeah.
bringing that in as a counterpoint to like, yeah, get a meal with your team and like get to know each other as people. And also like have other things going on in your role and in your life where this team and how it functions is not like the most important thing in the world to you, because that is unhelpful pressure as well, I think.
Yeah. Absolutely. We have a tenet on our website that says life outside of work is more important than work.
Yeah.
And that's, a bit maybe sarcastic, but also real. And it just helps us all to remember that that's true, right? We want to go all in while we're here, and we should have, we should keep our priorities, our priorities. So I love that
Totally.
counterpoint.
Well, I think when I think back to the most challenging or most dysfunctional teams that I have experienced, it's actually people being too wrapped up in how the team is going to go.
Yeah.
And that is, and as opposed to like people being disengaged and just like not involved. So I think there's actually, the extreme version in the other direction is actually kind of more dangerous.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah. I really appreciate this part of our conversation, because I think, I'm sitting here thinking in many ways, some of the activities we just named around that build connection, I think we all have probably been cynical of at times in our life, or maybe even we will be in 5 minutes from now.
Yeah.
And and yet, there, Joe, as you called out, the simple, like creating the conditions for people to better connect with each other is not rocket science, and it can have a really big impact. And I also wonder if part of the cynicism, at least I'll just speak for myself, that I've carried about some of these things like, retreats, and Joe and I just finished separately watching Company Retreat. If you haven't seen it yet, Sam, you
Okay.
should
Yeah. No, it's on my list.
definitely watch it.
Yeah.
You will love it because of your
Anthony for
perspective.
president.
What's that?
Anthony for president.
Yeah, yeah.
Favorite human.
Anthony's an incredible human being, but I wonder how much of it, like the way we feel about it, has to do with the framing for these things and the way we communicate about them as leaders.
Yeah.
And it's like, do we feel the way we do about some retreats that we've been a part of, or certain meals, because we've maybe been unclear about what the intention was, and
Sure.
yeah, and maybe that was inauthentic. I don't know. What do you think about that, Sam?
Well, I am I hate forced fun more than anyone.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what you're talking about. Like
Yeah.
nothing is less fun than being put in a place with people you don't have control, like people who you're not choosing to be with, and being told to have fun.
Yeah.
That's not to say that having fun with your colleagues is impossible or not a good thing to do, but I think it does take careful design to not make it feel compulsory. So, when I think about the best versions of the Ready retreats, we had very few things that everybody had to do forever or do together. And what we had were options where people could go do various things. And the people who would show up there are the people you would connect with. And for us, it, as kind of one big team, that was worthwhile. And I think when I think to clients that I've worked with where I feel like they've done this well, I think often it's a matter of not over designing. Like
Yeah.
getting a reservation at a restaurant and kind of maybe thinking through a little bit the seating order, so that maybe we break up clicks a little bit, and then just having a dinner and talking. That goes a long way, and I wouldn't really call that forced fun necessarily, but
Yeah.
kind of like showing up and having a facilitator make you play an awkward game. It's like, all right, well, there may be a place for it in some places. Like I've definitely like playing ballpoint with executive teams, this game for like simulating working in a more agile way. It always starts with eye rolls, and by the end, people are like super into it because it taps into like competition and stuff. So
Yeah.
there is a place, a time and a place for things like that. But I am always very conscious of trying to not make grown ass adults feel like children in an unhelpful way.
Yeah. This also makes me think, I think we can't expect it to solve other underlying challenges
Great
within
point.
the team, right?
Yeah.
And it's, at times we sort of think it might. So, if we've got psychological safety issues and we, don't actually start owning our behavior inside of meetings, the work of connecting outside of work might be helpful, but if we don't actually get at the root of some of the other things, that's not going to go away. But I also think like it's about how we show up outside of the connection moments as well, right?
Yeah.
Like, do we have a high bar, a high standard for how we operate? Is our it's like when we go hard with connection, just as hard as we do with our operating rhythm, our norms, our agreements, our charters, our focus, all those things. It just feels like, we just hold ourselves to a good standard across the board, even if it's, in the fact that we, are deliberate about how we check in and make time outside of work. So when it complements a good operating rhythm and, agreement, it feels different.
Yeah, what it makes me think of is something that I find myself saying a lot. If people are asking about, like, well, how do we build trust in this team? Like, what are some trust building things that we can do? And the best way to build trust is to just get after work that matters to the team in a different way, and like build the trust that way. It's not trust falls. It's not doing activities that are explicitly about building trust. Trust is something that you get as a bonus for doing work in a better way than you were doing it from before, and seeing that you can trust people to show up and do their part and
Yeah.
that sort of thing. Clarity often
Huge.
builds trust. Structure can build trust. Let's focus on those things rather than the thing that we think that we want.
Yeah, that's good.
I love that. We've definitely seen that. I think one of the things that we've learned over the years is that one of the strongest things that helps teams come together is just really meaningful shared work that they get to do together,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
And for
so,
a lot of leadership teams, they have non-articulated shared work.
right,
That is often like the first thing that I'll do with a leadership team is
right,
help them see that it's not just that they are a group of peers responsible for various parts of the organization. Like, yes, they each have their thing that they're leading, but
yeah,
there is kind of interstitial work in the operating system that
Mhm.
they are best situated to be seeing and capturing and doing, or kind of delegating to other people to do. And that is real like very senior shared work that if a leadership team hasn't really articulated for themselves, then they probably feel more like just a group of peers that meet on a periodic basis to update the boss on what has changed.
absolutely. Yeah, I love that. Maybe one last question for us, Sam, before we start to wrap up here. It's you've worked with a lot of different teams in a number of different industries. What are some of the characteristics that stand out that make those teams, when you think of the highest performing ones, such high performing teams?
Yeah, that is a good question. I mean, to point to something we've already talked about, there's a lightness to
Mm.
them.
Uh-huh.
Some of the highest functioning teams have been responsible for some like very real like life or death stuff, and still have a lightness about them.
Mm.
Like
Yeah.
there's a you can be light and also treat your work very seriously. And I think the best teams are able to like hold both of those things together in a way that is really compelling. Um, I think other things that come to mind, the best teams that I've seen, they have a lot of clarity around decision rights within the team,
Mm.
and will respect those decision rights even when they don't like it.
Hmm.
And usually there's a kind of a robust advice process that goes along with these, so people know that their advice will be asked. And also, if they don't have the call on it, if they've given their advice and the person making that call decides to not take their advice, like, okay, like we're going to move on, and we've set up the decision rights in such a way that we're okay with that, as
Mm.
opposed to every decision in this team has to be a consensus call, and we're going to,
Mm.
fight tooth and nail until we get there, and probably along the way make the decision much less interesting in order for us to fully agree on it. I think
Mm.
that willingness to be a bit spiky around certain people have certain calls because of their role and their responsibilities, and we're okay with that,
Mm.
is a sign of a really healthy team. And then the last thing that comes to mind is just a real commitment to the boring stuff about good teaming. Having an operating rhythm that they treat relatively sacredly. We're going to do these meetings no matter what. We're going to do retros. We're going to have our weekly action meeting. We're going to stick to our communication agreements. There's an expectation that we are all going to kind of be the agreement police to each other, like to like help each other remember that we're trying to agree to do things, and we're not going to just offload that to one person on the team to be the bad guy all the time, to be like, well, we said we were going to do this and nobody's doing it. Like, no, like we're going to hold that together because we all
Mhm.
care about it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I,
Any 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 Bluey fans? Bluey parents over
Uh,
there?
I only vaguely know Bluey, so
Boring, as mom says, boring is important. So,
I love
the
that.
great
That is,
great
I 100% agree.
my kids are, obsessed with Bluey right now, and boring is
Nice.
important was a recent episode. Sam, that second point that you said, though, I think I wanna pull out, the the way to get to that level of, um, you know, we can operate in a way where we're not holding each other back and we're not holding the team back. We can make decisions and move things forward because we have trust and clarity. I think a lot of times, the pattern that we've seen is just the opposite of what you shared there, where we do need to bring everyone together to talk through this, to work it out before anything can move forward. And I do think at times there's just a pattern, a norm that is hard to overcome. But I think where teams oftentimes go is trust, and that this is just about trust. And that's an important piece to it. But I think you call out this clarity piece that is often missing in the solutioning, clarity around roles and decision-making rights. And oftentimes when you can solve for that part of the issue, the root, all of a sudden you realize, oh, maybe this was less around trust and more just around like, I didn't know how we were operating here. Right.
Yeah,
And so if we can get clear on some of that, yeah, just how sort of enabling that can be for a team. And it's so important. We've just seen this pattern so many times, and it's slows teams down, and it can be really hard to overcome. So I love that you helped us
totally.
to see the solution in there.
Well, in the absence of any sort of structure or process, I think we just default to talking about it
Yeah.
and trying to get to a decision. And some decisions we need to do that for a particular type of decision. Perhaps it doesn't live with any particular role, and we need to come to an agreement together as a team. But those should be relatively rare. And I
Mhm.
think in a lot of organizations, I'm always gobsmacked at some of the decisions that the senior leadership team feels like they have to make together when
Yeah.
it's very clearly in the realm of kind of one specific member of that team. And if they
Mhm.
get the advice that they need, and it's not even like that important, like
Mhm.
they can make the call, and even if they're wrong, like we'll probably recover from it just fine. So all of the opportunity cost, I am cursed to see opportunity costs every time I work with a leadership team, and then
Mhm.
they're like arguing about this really inconsequential thing for half an hour. I'm like, there are so many bigger things for you all to be
Mhm.
wrestling with
Mhm.
than this very kind of narrow decision that's very
Mhm.
clearly the CHRO's kind of call to make.
Yeah.
Like, what are we doing here?
Sam, to call back to something you shared earlier and connect to this, have you seen a team's commitment to, regular retrospectives and experimentation help them to be more at peace with, decision rights that might fall to an individual on a team, meaning that, we're going to
Yeah,
circle back to this if it doesn't go the way we thought it would go anyway.
totally.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and if you're doing good retrospectives, we should be looking forward to the next one because we know there's a bunch of juicy stuff that we want to retrospect and talk about and make
Mm,
better. And if you find yourself dreading your retrospectives, it's a sign that your retros aren't actually doing much of anything, and it's probably a sign to rethink how we facilitate or how we design them or what we do
yeah.
with whatever comes out of that
Yeah.
conversation.
Mhm.
Well, that I love that. That makes me think that you're probably feeling that way because your sense is I have teammates that are going to really engage with me in this. Like
Yeah.
I've got a juicy thing of substance to dive into, and I feel like I've got teammates who are going to engage with it in a really meaningful way with me.
Yeah.
Totally. Well, and I think also just seeing the team as an entity that can and should get better over time, and that
Mm,
the retro is a opportunity for a concentrated dose of us getting better as a
mm,
team. So it's a to use like a video game metaphor, a retro is like when you get to level up as a
Yeah.
team. Like we come out of
Mhm.
the retro hopefully qualitatively better than we did when we stepped into that retro. And I think the healthiest teams have something like that in their heads when they're
mhm.
doing these quote unquote boring sort of parts of the algorithm.
That's great.
That's awesome. Okay, so I lied. We do have one more question that we ask everybody, which is, think of the best teammate you ever had. You don't have to name this person,
Okay.
but when you think of that person, or could be one of the best teammates you ever had, what characteristics did they embody? What made you think of that person when we asked this question?
The first thing is self awareness.
Mm,
They know what they are good at and will kind of fearlessly step into the moments and the environments and the tasks and the projects where they get to really flex their zone of genius. And on the other side of that self-awareness, knowing where they don't have the skills or lack the experience to do something and being proactive about asking for help or asking for somebody else to take a lead on a thing. I think when you have a team full of people who are very self-aware, there's this like really satisfying slotting into everybody doing the thing that they are best at that can
mm,
feel really good as a teammate, builds a lot of trust. I think the other thing that comes to mind, the best folks who I ever worked with predominantly at the Ready, were folks who would see a thing that needed to be done and would just do it. And so they were very good at, because the Ready is a self-managing organization. We kind of, everybody was kind of like this already at the Ready, very self-motivated folks. But there's a lot of stuff that in a well-functioning team is not glamorous, kind of invisible work. And if everybody is kind of on the lookout for those things and picks things up and does them, it makes them great teammates. And super bonus points to make sure that minority identities are not the ones always picking up that invisible work on a team, which is too often kind of the default. And then just the last thing of like doing the thing that you say you're going to do. Just that sort of like reliability is like the number one thing in a teammate. Like if we leave a meeting and I have some things to do and you have some things to do and you always do your things and I always do my things, like, is there anything better than that?
Yeah. I love it. I think you've got the highest score so far on the answer to this question. So a great job there, Sam.
I didn't realize it was a game, but I'm all about. I guess I'm all about winning. So
it's a secret guild game that Joe and I are keeping score of behind the scenes. So
I need to start putting up a. End.
That's great. Yeah. So, is there anything you'd like to promote, and where can people find you?
Sure. So deliberateworks.com is where Deliberate Works lives. For folks listening to this, the thing that might be most interesting is that it's still early days, but I'm trying to create something that I'm calling Deliberate Works Studio, which is going to be some sort of haven, community, library, oasis for people who think about organizations the way the three of us do and the way chances are you do if you're listening to this right now. I'm still figuring out what exactly that is, but if you go to deliberateworks.com, you'll see a sign up where you can sign up and you'll get updates as I figure that sort of stuff out. And then otherwise, I'm more active than I want to be on LinkedIn. You can find me there. I accept every connection request. And I'm at Sam Spurlin on Blue Sky, Threads, and Instagram.
Awesome, Sam. Well, I don't know that I told you this, but one thing I just want to share with you is you've transitioned away from the Ready to now doing your own thing with Deliberate Works. I thought it was really amazing how you invited people into that journey. I don't know that I've really ever seen anybody transition in their career the way, or communicate about the way they transition their career the way you have. And
yeah, you're referring to those emails that I sent to people who I talked to, right?
Yeah. Well, you were sending emails, but you were also talking about it on LinkedIn, and I think you did it in a way that I'm sure felt like a little risky to you, and yet it just felt, I don't know, it didn't on the other side of it, I felt a lot of confidence in you, like just knowing who you are and where you want to go, and having a lot of faith that it was going to work out, and being okay with sharing people about some of the uncertainty you were facing. I thought it was a really cool thing that you did there.
Well, I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Well, Sam, so great to have you on. Just great to be able to talk with you about these topics. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thanks for tuning in, as always, this episode of Leading Together. If you found it valuable, be sure to like, subscribe, leave a review. It helps more leadership teams discover these conversations. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, or drop a comment with your thoughts. And as always, you can find more resources at sixlevers.co, not .com, just .co, including signing up for our newsletter, which we ship out every Tuesday morning. Thanks a lot.